Abandoned by their children, they discover a buried house. And what was inside changes everything. Margaret Henderson held tightly to the handle of the red suitcase as she watched the court officer place the seal on the door of her home. 43 years of marriage, 43 years in that simple house, and now it was all over. Beside her, Walter adjusted the blue suitcase on his shoulder and took a deep breath, trying to contain the anger growing in his chest. The bank had foreclosed on the mortgage. Their children, when they learned of their parents' desperate situation, simply refused to help. "You'll have to figure it out yourselves," had said Richard, the eldest. "I can't be responsible for your mistakes," added Linda, the middle child, and the youngest, David, didn't even answer the calls. Margaret watched the familiar streets of the small town of Williamsburg as they walked aimlessly. The stones of the colonial pavement seemed harder under her tired feet. Walter, at 71, carried on his back not just the suitcase, but the weight of a lifetime of honest work that wasn't enough to secure a roof in their old age. "Where do we go now, Walter?" asked Margaret, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know, my dear. I don't know anything anymore." Their pension was barely enough for food, let alone rent. Their friends their age had already passed away, or were in equally difficult situations. The town's charity institutions were full, and the waiting list was immense. They were truly alone in the world. They walked all morning, stopping on park benches to rest. The autumn sun of the region shone gently on their wrinkled faces, but did not warm the cold they felt inside. Margaret watched families passing by on the street, children running after their parents, and felt a deep pain remembering when her own children were small. "Remember when Richard broke his arm and we stayed all night at the hospital?" murmured Margaret, more to herself than to her husband. Walter nodded, his eyes moist. "And when Linda had pneumonia, you didn't leave her bedside for a week." They had dedicated their entire lives to their children. Walter had worked as a mechanic for over 40 years, always honest, always present. Margaret had been an elementary school teacher, educating dozens of children with affection and patience. Nothing was ever lacking at home. There was never violence or abandonment. How could their children simply turn their backs when they were most needed? At dusk, they found themselves on the outskirts of town, where the houses became more sparse and nature began to take over. Margaret felt her legs trembling with fatigue. Walter noticed his wife's suffering and looked for a place to rest. "There, on that hill," he pointed. "Let's go up a bit and see if we can find some shade." The climb was difficult for the couple. The loose stones of the terrain and the dry vegetation made each step hard. But something caught Margaret's attention as they neared the top of the small rise. Among the stones and bushes, there was something that didn't seem natural. "Walter, look there, isn't that a door?" Walter adjusted his glasses and followed his wife's gaze. There really was a strange structure among the rocks, an old dark wooden door, weathered by time, set into an arch of stones that seemed to have been built long ago. Vegetation grew around it, almost completely hiding the entrance. "What a strange place for a door," murmured Walter, approaching curiously. Margaret felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something familiar about that place, a strange feeling she couldn't explain. It was as if she had been there before, though she was certain she had never climbed that hill. "Do you think someone lives in there?" asked Margaret, her voice low and fearful. Walter knocked lightly on the wooden door. The sound echoed peculiarly, as if there were a large space on the other side. There was no answer. He tried to push, but the door was locked. He looked around and found a loose stone that seemed to serve as an improvised key holder. Under it was an old key, rusted by time. "Margaret, there's a key here. Do you think—" "I don't know, Walter. What if it's someone's property? I don't want us to get into trouble." But what trouble could be worse than sleeping out in the open? Walter weighed the situation. They were homeless, penniless, with no family. One night of shelter, even if it was trespassing, might be what they needed to regain their strength and think of a solution. "It's just for one night, Margaret. Tomorrow we'll look for the owners and explain the situation." With a trembling hand, Walter put the key in the lock. He turned it with difficulty, but the door opened with a deep creak. A current of fresh air came from inside, bringing a strange smell, a mix of dampness and something sweet they couldn't identify. Margaret gripped her husband's arm tightly. Walter, I'm scared. Me too, dear, but we have no choice. They entered slowly, groping in the darkness. Walter lit the lighter he always carried in his pocket, and the weak flame illuminated the space. What they saw left them speechless. It wasn't a simple cave or improvised shelter. It was a complete house carved into the hillside rock. The walls were of fitted stone, the floor of well-preserved wooden planks. There was antique furniture, but in perfect condition, as if someone had left not long ago. "My goodness," whispered Margaret. "What is this place?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Walter found an oil lamp on a table and managed to light it. The golden light revealed even more impressive details. The house had at least 3 rooms they could see from the entrance: a living room with worn leather armchairs, a kitchen with a wood-burning stove and shelves full of preserves, and what looked like a bedroom at the back. Margaret approached the living room table and noticed it was set for dinner. 2 plates, 2 cups, cutlery arranged carefully. In the center, a platter with fruit that, though dried, still maintained its original shape. "Walter, look at this. It seems like whoever lived here left suddenly in the middle of a meal." Walter examined the kitchen. The pots were clean and organized. The supplies on the shelves looked old, but many were still sealed. There were cans of preserves, packages of flour, salt, sugar, even some bottles of wine that seemed to have value. "Margaret, come see this." She approached and Walter showed her a letter that was on the kitchen table. The paper, yellowed with time, bore delicate feminine handwriting. At the top it read, "To my dear children." Margaret took the letter with trembling hands and began to read in a low voice. "My dear children, if you are reading this, it is because you have finally found your way back home. I always knew that one day you would come. Perhaps I will no longer be here when that happens, but I leave this house and everything in it as a legacy of the love I have always felt for you." Margaret stopped reading. Her voice choked. She looked at Walter with tears in her eyes. "Walter, I think we are in the house of someone who was also abandoned by their children. Keep reading, Margaret. Maybe we'll understand what happened here." She took a deep breath and continued. "I know you must be confused and perhaps frightened. This house was our refuge when the outside world became too cruel. Your father and I built each room with our own hands, carving the rock day after day, dreaming of the day our family would be reunited here." Margaret paused, wiping the tears that began to flow. "You will find everything you need to live with dignity. The pantry is always full, there's enough firewood for winter, and in the main bedroom under the bed there's a trunk with important documents and some savings we've kept over the years." Walter and Margaret exchanged glances. The situation was becoming more and more surreal. Who was this family? Why had they abandoned such a well-kept house? And why did they feel entitled to enter as if it were natural? "Finish reading, Margaret. Don't feel guilty for occupying this place. It was made with love and should continue to be a home where love is the most important thing. Take care of each other. Take care of this house. And always remember that, no matter what happens in the world outside, here you will always have a place to call home. With all my love, Elizabeth Turner." Silence filled the underground house. Margaret felt her heart racing strangely, as if the name Elizabeth awakened some distant and confused memory. Walter, in turn, observed every detail of the surroundings, trying to understand how 2 elderly people like them managed to create such a welcoming place carved into the rock. "Margaret, do you know anyone named Elizabeth Turner?" "Not that I recall. But there's something about that name that bothers me, as if I've heard it before." Walter walked to the living room window. It was a small opening, disguised on the hillside, that allowed natural light during the day and offered a discreet view of the valley below. From there he could see the city of Williamsburg in the distance, lights beginning to turn on in the early evening. "Margaret, from this window you can see our old house." She approached and confirmed. The house where they had lived for 43 years was clearly visible from there, a location that didn't seem accidental. "It's as if whoever lived here wanted to watch our house," murmured Margaret, feeling that strange chill again. Walter found more letters scattered around the house, some on the mantel, others in drawers, one even between the pages of an old book. All signed by Elizabeth, all addressed to "my dear children," but with different contents. They seemed to have been written at different times. Margaret opened one of the more yellowed letters. "My dear children, today marks 15 years since you left. William and I just finished excavating the back room. We imagine you might want to bring the grandchildren to see this place someday. Children always loved adventures, and what greater adventure than a secret house carved into the mountain?" A more recent letter said, "My dear children, William hasn't been feeling well lately. I'm worried he won't live to see you again. But I promised him you would find this place. He left tools organized in the pantry in case you want to make improvements to the house. He was always so meticulous with his things." And in another, which seemed much more recent, "My dear children, if you're reading this, it means William and I have already passed on. Don't be sad. We lived here the happiest years of our lives, always hoping to reunite with you. This house is now your house. Make it a home full of love again." Margaret was visibly shaken. The similarities between their situation and Elizabeth and William's were disturbing. Two elderly couples, abandoned by their children, building a refuge where they could live with dignity. "Walter, are we doing the right thing by staying here?" "I don't know, Margaret, but this Elizabeth, whoever she was, seems to have left the house precisely for people like us. And look how well kept it is. It's as if someone still takes care of this place." Walter was right. Despite clearly being uninhabited for some time, the house had no mold, excessive dust, or signs of neglect. The bed linens were clean and fresh, the provisions organized, even firewood cut and stacked beside the stove. Margaret opened the bedroom closet and found clothes hanging inside. Simple but good quality dresses, some men's coats, shoes lined up on the floor. And at the back of the closet, a shoebox full of photographs. "Walter, come look at this." The photographs showed a couple at different stages of life. In the oldest ones, they were young, smiling, surrounded by 3 small children. In the more recent ones, they were elderly with white hair, still smiling, but with a hint of melancholy in their eyes. Margaret held one of the photos in the lantern light. The elderly woman in the image had features incredibly similar to her own. Same height, same build. Even the shape of the face was similar. "Walter, look at this. This woman in the photo looks like me." Walter examined the photograph. It was disturbing. If he didn't know it was impossible, he'd say he was looking at Margaret 30 years younger. "It's a strange coincidence, Margaret, but it happens. They say everyone has a double somewhere in the world." But Margaret wasn't convinced. There was something more, something she couldn't explain. When she touched the objects in the house, she felt a strange familiarity, as if her hands already knew those textures. The shape of the cups, the height of the table, even the way the closet door closed, everything seemed familiar in a way impossible to explain. They decided to spend the night there. Walter lit the wood stove and heated a vegetable soup they found in one of the cans. Margaret washed the dishes in the small sink that had running water, piped from a spring high on the hill. It was unbelievable how that house had all the basic comforts. During dinner, they talked about their situation and about the mystery of the house. The lantern light created dancing shadows on the stone walls, and the atmosphere had something magical about it, despite all the strangeness of the situation. "Margaret, I'll be honest with you. I don't know if we'll be able to leave here tomorrow." "What do you mean?" "Where will we sleep tomorrow? Do we have money for a boarding house? For food? Maybe this Elizabeth, wherever she is, wouldn't mind if we stayed here for a few days until we can get organized." Margaret agreed. It was the most sensible option they had at the moment. Besides, she felt strangely comfortable in that place, as if she belonged there. They settled into the main bedroom in a large and comfortable bed. Walter put out the lantern, and darkness took over the room. But Margaret couldn't sleep. Her mind was buzzing with questions about Elizabeth and William, about the children who had abandoned them, about the impossible similarities between the two families. "Walter, are you asleep?" "No. I'm thinking about all this too. It's very strange, Margaret. It's as if this house was waiting for us. I have the feeling I've slept in this bed before. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what I feel." Walter turned to his wife. In the darkness, he could only see the outline of her face. "Margaret, Are you sure your adoptive parents never mentioned anything about your biological family? The question took Margaret by surprise. She had been adopted as a baby by the parents who raised her, but she never knew details about her origin. Her adoptive parents had always been evasive on the subject, saying only that her biological mother couldn't raise her. Why do you ask that? Because the similarities to this Elizabeth are too specific to be a coincidence. And this house, it's as if someone had prepared it especially for us. Margaret felt her heart race. The possibility Walter suggested was both frightening and exciting. Could it be that Elizabeth was her biological mother? A mother she never knew, but who had prepared a home for her? Walter, that's crazy. Even if it were true, how would Elizabeth know I would end up here? I don't know, Margaret, but let's look for more clues tomorrow. Perhaps we'll find something that clarifies this situation. They finally fell asleep, physically and emotionally exhausted. Margaret had strange dreams that night. She dreamed of a woman with dark hair singing her lullabies, of a man carrying her on his shoulders, of a flower garden where she played with other children. They were vivid dreams, almost like memories, but from a time she didn't consciously remember. When they woke the next morning, natural light streamed through the small window, revealing details of the house they hadn't noticed the night before. Margaret got up first and went to the kitchen to make coffee. She found an aluminum pot and roasted coffee in a glass jar, everything very well preserved. Walter woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Margaret moving about in the kitchen. For a moment he forgot where he was. The feeling of normalcy was so strong it felt like he was in his own home. "Good morning, dear. How did you sleep?" "Strangely well. Much better than I expected to sleep on the first night away from home." They ate breakfast in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Through the window, they could see the city's movement beginning down below. People heading out to work, children going to school, normal life following its course while they lived this surreal experience. "Margaret, shall we explore the house better today? Perhaps we'll find more answers." They began a systematic search of the rooms. In the pantry, besides the provisions, they found tools organized on shelves. Hammers, saws, drills, all very well cared for. It was evident that William was a skilled man, capable of making any necessary repairs, but it was in the bedroom that they made the most significant discovery. Margaret remembered Elizabeth's letter mentioning a trunk under the bed. Walter moved the heavy bed and revealed an old wooden trunk with an iron lock. "I wonder if it's locked." Margaret tried to open it, and, to their surprise, the lid lifted easily. The inside of the trunk was organized like a personal archive. Documents carefully kept in folders, photographs in envelopes, letters tied with ribbons. Walter took out a folder labeled Certificates. Inside were birth certificates, marriage certificates, and other official documents. The marriage certificate was for Elizabeth Turner and William Henderson, dated 1952. "Margaret, look at his last name. William Henderson, the same as yours." It was one more coincidence in a sequence already too long to be casual. Margaret picked up another folder labeled Children's Documents. Her heart stopped when she opened it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Inside the folder were 3 original birth certificates and 3 corresponding adoption documents. Elizabeth and William's children had been placed for adoption in 1958, 1959, and 1960. 1 girl and 2 boys, all babies at the time of adoption. Margaret held one of the certificates with trembling hands. The child's name was Margaret Henderson, born March 15th, 1958. Her birth date, her baptismal name, which had been changed to Margaret when she was adopted, and the mother's name, Elizabeth Turner. "Walter," her voice came out as a whisper. "Walter, look at this." He read the document and felt the world spin. His wife was Elizabeth's daughter. The woman who had prepared that house, who had written those letters full of love and hope, was Margaret's biological mother. "My God, Margaret, it's you. Elizabeth was your mother." Margaret broke down in tears. 40 years searching for answers about her origin. 40 years wondering who her biological parents were, why they had given her up for adoption, if they thought of her. And now she discovered that her mother had spent her entire life building a home for her, watching her from afar, hoping that one day she would find her way back. Walter embraced his wife, also moved. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. The location of the house, from which one could perfectly see the house where Margaret had lived. Elizabeth had chosen that location strategically to be able to watch the daughter she was never able to raise. But Walter, why did she give me up for adoption? Why didn't she keep me? Walter continued rummaging through the trunk and found a folder labeled Family History. Inside was a long letter, more detailed than the others, explaining the circumstances that led to the family's separation. Linda couldn't read. Her hands were shaking too much and tears blurred her vision. Walter took the letter and began to read aloud. My dear Margaret Henderson, my sweet William Jr., my little Frank, if you are reading this, it is because you have finally discovered who you are and where you came from. I will tell you the most painful story of my life, but also the one most full of love. Walter paused, observing Linda's emotional state. She gestured for him to continue. In 1957, William and I were a young, happy couple. He worked in construction and I was a seamstress. We lived in a simple little house in town, and when Margaret Henderson was born in 1958, we thought we were the most blessed people in the world. Linda sobbed softly, imagining the parents she never knew as young people full of dreams. But in 1959, there was a great drought in the region. Work became scarce, and William was unemployed for months. I tried to support the family with sewing, but it wasn't enough. When William Jr. was born, our situation became even more difficult. The letter continued recounting a sequence of misfortunes that plagued the family. The prolonged drought, the lack of work, the birth of the third child in 1960 when they were still struggling to feed the other two. Elizabeth described in detail the agony of seeing her children going hungry, of not having enough milk to breastfeed. The most difficult decision of our lives came when the social worker approached us. There were 3 families in town wanting to adopt children, families with the means to give our children everything we could not. Education, proper food, medical care, a future. Linda began to understand the magnitude of her biological parents' sacrifice. They hadn't gotten rid of their children out of neglect or lack of love. On the contrary, it was an act of extreme love, placing the children's well-being above their own happiness. William and I cried for days. We talked, argued, prayed, but we came to the conclusion that our love for our children demanded we make the most painful decision possible, to give you to families who could provide what we could not. The letter explained how each child was given to a different family. Margaret Henderson to John and Teresa Collins, a childless merchant couple. William Jr. to Charles and Martha Williams, prosperous farmers. Frank to Anthony and Rose Mitchell, teachers at the local school. We demanded only one condition, that we could continue living in the same town to be able to watch you grow up. The adoptive families agreed, as long as we never interfered in your upbringing. Walter stopped reading, watching Linda process this information. She wiped her tears and asked him to continue. For 30 years I watched you from afar. I saw Margaret Henderson become a dedicated teacher, marry a good man, have wonderful children. I saw William Jr. grow strong and hard-working like his father, build a solid family. I saw Frank graduate as an engineer and achieve everything we always dreamed for him. Linda now remembered some situations from her childhood that she had never understood. The woman who always appeared at school events, sitting at the back of the auditorium watching from afar. The lady who attended the church where her adoptive family went, always smiling at her in a special way. The mysterious benefactor who, according to her adoptive parents, anonymously paid for her teaching studies. William and I moved to this hill when you were already adults and had started your own families. We built this house with our own hands, stone by stone, dreaming of the day you would discover who we were and come to visit us. The letter revealed that Elizabeth and William had built the underground house over 15 years. They started with a small natural cave and kept expanding, creating rooms, installing plumbing, building a true home hidden in the mountain. We knew you might never look for us. We knew you might never forgive our decision. But we kept hoping, and this house was our way of leaving a legacy of love for you. even if we were no longer here when you found it. Margaret was emotionally devastated, but also began to feel a peace she had never experienced before. She finally had answers. She finally knew she had been loved from the very first moment of life, that the decision to give her up for adoption was an act of sacrificial love, not abandonment. But there is something more I need to tell you, something I discovered only recently, and that might explain why you, Margaret Henderson, are reading this. Walter looked at Margaret, intrigued. The letter wasn't finished yet, and it seemed there were even greater revelations to come. In 2015, I began to discreetly investigate the lives of you three. I wanted to know if you were happy, if you had everything you needed, if our chosen families had taken good care of you. That's when I discovered something that left me deeply concerned. Margaret held her breath, waiting for what would come next. Margaret Henderson, I discovered that your adoptive family had passed away and that you were facing financial difficulties. I saw your house foreclosed on by the bank. I saw your children abandon you when you needed help the most, and I realized our story was repeating itself. The letter revealed that Elizabeth had observed Carmen and Walter's entire financial crisis. She had seen the couple's desperation, the ingratitude of their children, the imminent eviction, and she had meticulously planned for them to find the house. I left the key in the place where I always left it. I left letters scattered around the house to guide you gradually to the truth. I arranged everything so you would discover who you are and where you came from when you most needed a home. Margaret understood then that none of it had been a coincidence. Elizabeth had orchestrated every detail so her daughter would find refuge in her moment of greatest despair. The location of the key, the perfect preservation of the house, even the fact that they had climbed exactly that hill on that day. William passed away last December. His heart could no longer bear the pain of separation from the family. I will follow him soon, but I leave this house to you, my dear Margaret Henderson. I also leave information about your siblings, so you can meet if you wish. The letter ended with a declaration of love that made Margaret cry even more intensely. My dear daughter, not a day passed in my life without me thinking of you. Every morning I looked out the window of this house in the direction of yours, mentally sending you all the love I couldn't show you in person. Now you are home. Finally home. Take care of this place as William and I did. Fill it again with love and joy. And if you can, forgive a mother who loved so much that she was able to give up her own happiness to ensure yours. With eternal love, Elizabeth Turner Henderson. Silence filled the underground house. Margaret wept convulsively, clinging to Walter, who was also deeply moved. Decades of questions had been answered in one morning. Decades of pain from a lack of identity had transformed into understanding and gratitude. Walter, my mother loved me. She always loved me. Yes, Margaret, and what love, what sacrifice. They spent the rest of the day reading other letters, examining photographs, discovering details about the lives of Elizabeth and William. They also found information about Margaret's siblings. William Jr., now known as Charles Williams, had become a successful businessman in Savannah. Frank, who had adopted the name David Mitchell, was an engineer in Charleston. Margaret felt a mix of anxiety and excitement at the possibility of meeting the brothers she never knew existed. Had they also searched for their origins? Had Elizabeth left messages for them too? In the trunk, they found updated addresses for the siblings, phone numbers, even recent photographs that Elizabeth had discreetly obtained. It was evident she maintained a loving watch over her 3 children. Margaret, do you want to try to contact your brothers? I don't know, Walter. I'm afraid of rejection. What if they don't want to know me? What if they're happy not knowing this story? It was an understandable concern. After all, they had their own families, their own established lives. The discovery of biological siblings could be a complication they might not want. But Walter found another letter in the trunk, this one addressed specifically to whoever found the house first. To the son or daughter who finds this house first, I ask that you do not carry the weight of this revelation alone. Your siblings also deserve to know the truth about their origins. They too have spent their lives wondering where they came from. They too deserve to find their way back home. The letter included specific instructions on how to contact the siblings, suggestions on how to approach the delicate subject, even letters already written for each of them, explaining the situation and inviting them to see the house. Margaret decided she would try. After all, if there was one thing she had learned from her own experience of being abandoned by her children, it was that family is the most precious thing one can have. And she had just discovered she had a family she never knew existed. They spent a few more days in the house, organizing Elizabeth and William's belongings, reading every letter, every document, every fragment of the family history that had been preserved. Margaret felt increasingly connected to that place, as if each day spent there awakened unconscious memories from her earliest childhood. Walter, in turn, marveled at William's ingenuity. The house was a work of art of improvised architecture. Every detail had been carefully considered. The natural ventilation that kept the space always cool, the rainwater collection system, the pantry that remained always dry, even a small indoor garden illuminated by an opening in the ceiling. It was during this more detailed exploration that Walter made a discovery that completely changed his understanding of the situation. At the back of the pantry, behind shelves of supplies, he found a small, narrow door they hadn't noticed before. The door was unlocked and led to a tunnel dug into the rock. "Margaret, come see this. There are more rooms back here." They took the lantern and entered the tunnel. After a few meters, they reached a circular room, larger than all the other rooms in the house. The walls were covered with shelves, and the shelves were filled with documents, photographs, and personal objects. "My God, Walter, it's like an archive of our entire family." Margaret was right. Elizabeth had created a veritable museum of the family that had been separated. There were photographs of Margaret from childhood through adulthood, obviously taken from a distance or obtained by other means. There were newspaper clippings about the professional achievements of the three children. There were even drawings made by the children and kept by the adoptive parents, which Elizabeth had somehow managed to acquire. But the most impactful discovery was on a special shelf in the center of the room. 3 smaller chests, each with the name of one of the children. Margaret's chest contained objects from her childhood, a little dress she wore as a baby, her first baby bottle, a small cloth doll that Elizabeth had sewn for her. Margaret picked up the doll with trembling hands. It was impossible, but she remembered that doll. She remembered sleeping while hugging it. She remembered its colorful little clothes. She even remembered the smell it had when it was new. "Walter, I remember this doll. How is that possible if I was only a few months old when I was adopted?" Walter examined other objects in the chest. There was a book of lullabies with Elizabeth's notes about which songs Margaret liked best. There was a silver spoon with her name engraved. There were even locks of her baby hair carefully preserved in small envelopes. "Margaret, perhaps you were older when you were adopted than you always believed. Perhaps Elizabeth managed to stay with you for longer." It was a disturbing possibility. Margaret had always believed she was adopted when she was just a few months old, as her adoptive parents had told her. But the objects in the chest suggested a longer period of living with Elizabeth. They found one of Elizabeth's diaries, and the first pages clarified the situation. March 15th, 1958. "Margaret was born today. She is the most beautiful child I have ever seen. William is radiant with happiness. I promised myself I would write down every moment of her life in this diary." The following pages recounted Margaret's daily life as a baby. Her first words, her first steps, her mischief and discoveries. The diary showed a normal, happy family during Margaret's first years of life. December 10th, 1960. "The situation is unsustainable. Frank was born 3 weeks ago and I don't have enough milk to feed him. Margaret, 2.5 years old, asks why there is no food on the table. William goes out every day looking for work, but returns empty-handed. I don't know what to do anymore." Margaret read with a heavy heart. She had lived with Elizabeth until she was 2.5, long enough to form unconscious memories that explained her strange familiarity with the house. January 15th, 1961. "Today was the hardest day of my life. I gave Margaret to John and Teresa. She cried so much I thought my heart would stop. I promised her that one day we would meet again, even though she was too young to understand." Margaret's tears dripped onto the yellowed pages of the diary. She finally understood why she had fragmented memories of a woman who sang to her, of a man who carried her on his shoulders, of a house that felt like home. They were real memories of her first years of life with Elizabeth and William. January 20th, 1961. William Jr. was given away today. He cried less than his sister, perhaps because he was younger. William was inconsolable. He said we failed as parents, that we didn't deserve to have children if we couldn't care for them. I fear our grief will destroy our marriage. January 25th, 1961. Frank was the last to be given away. At just 4 months old, he slept in his new mother's arms as if it were natural. Perhaps it's better this way. Perhaps it's better that he doesn't remember us, that he doesn't feel the pain of separation like the other two. Margaret closed the diary, unable to continue reading. Elizabeth's pain was etched in every word, in every line. It was impossible to imagine the suffering of a mother forced to give up her 3 children in 1 week. Walter embraced his wife, letting her cry freely. Little by little, he began to understand why Margaret had always been such a caring person, so dedicated to her children. She unconsciously carried the memory of the unconditional love she had received in her early years. Margaret, now you understand why you felt at home here from the very first moment. You really have lived here before. That's why I recognized the doll, why I knew where things were, why everything felt familiar. My subconscious held on to these memories for over 60 years. They spent the rest of the day exploring the other trunks. William Jr.'s trunk contained little boys' clothes, wooden toy cars handmade by William, a small toy hammer. Frank's trunk had children's books, building blocks, a teddy bear sewn by Elizabeth. It was evident that Elizabeth had managed to preserve items from all 3 children, probably asking the adoptive families to keep at least a few mementos. The care with which everything was preserved showed a mother who never gave up hope of reuniting the family. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Margaret made a decision. She would contact her siblings. The time had come to reunite the family that Elizabeth had so dreamed of rebuilding. She started with William Jr., now Charles Williams. The number Elizabeth had written down was still valid. When Margaret called, a male voice answered the phone. "Hello? Please don't hang up. My name is Margaret Henderson and I need to talk about your biological mother." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Margaret could hear the man's heavy breathing. "How do you know about that?" "Because she was my mother too. We are siblings, Walter." The silence stretched even longer. Margaret feared he would hang up the phone. "Where did you get this information?" "In the house she built for us. The house where she lived, hoping that one day we would find our way back to her." "What house? What are you talking about?" Margaret briefly explained the situation. How they had found the house excavated into the hill, Elizabeth's letters, the documents that proved their kinship. William Jr. listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. "Are you sure this information is true?" "I have all the documents here. Original birth certificates, adoption papers, letters written by Elizabeth explaining the whole story. And I also have items from our childhood, things our mother kept all these years." William Jr., who now went by the name Charles, agreed to visit them the following weekend. He said he had always wondered about his origins and was anxious to learn the truth, however painful it might be. The phone call to Frank was more difficult. The number was outdated, and Margaret had to make several calls until she found the correct number. When she finally managed to speak with him, the reaction was one of skepticism and irritation. "Look, Mom, I don't know what kind of scam this is, but I'm not interested." "It's not a scam, David. It's about our biological family." "I don't have a biological family. I only have the parents who raised me and my own family." Margaret tried to explain the situation, but Frank refused to listen. He said he had tried to find information about his origins in his youth, but gave up after several dead ends. Now at 60 years old, he didn't want to stir up that past anymore. "If you're telling the truth, then why did our biological mother never look for us before?" "Because she thought we were happy with our adoptive families. She watched us from afar, respecting the conditions of the adoption process." And you expect me to believe there's a secret house where she lived all these years waiting for us? Margaret understood it would be difficult to convince Frank over the phone alone. She decided to send him some photographs and documents by mail, hoping the physical evidence would be more convincing than words. The following Saturday, Charles arrived at the underground house. Margaret and Walter waited for him at the entrance, nervous and anxious. When they saw a tall man with graying hair getting out of a white pickup truck, Margaret felt her heart race. "William? Margaret?" They looked at each other for a few seconds before embracing. It was impossible to deny the physical resemblance between the siblings. Same height, same face shape, same brown eyes. Charles was visibly emotional. "I can't believe I've finally found my family." Margaret led him inside the house, explaining every detail of the discovery. Charles was impressed with the structure of the building, the organization of the documents, the care Elizabeth had taken to preserve everything. "She really waited for us all these years. Every day of her life. Come, I want to show you something." Margaret took him to the trunk with her childhood belongings. Charles picked up the wooden toy car with trembling hands. "I remember this car. I didn't know why, but I was always fascinated by wooden cars. Now I understand where it came from." They spent the entire day talking, sharing memories, comparing experiences. Charles said he always felt different from the family that adopted him, not for lack of love, but because of personality traits that couldn't be explained by his adoptive parents' genetics. "I was always obsessed with construction, with working with my hands. My adoptive parents were merchants. They didn't understand where this passion came from. Now I see I inherited it from our biological father." Charles decided to stay at the house for a few days, helping Margaret and Walter better organize the documents and plan the next steps. He was a financially successful man, owner of a construction company in Savannah, and offered to make improvements to the underground house. "Our mother and our father built all this with basic tools. Imagine what we can do with modern equipment." It was Charles who suggested they try to find Elizabeth and William in person. The letters suggested they had departed, but there was no death certificate, no definitive confirmation. What if they are still alive? What if they are in some hospital, some nursing home? We need to be sure. Margaret hadn't considered this possibility. The letters seemed written as final farewells, but it was true there was no confirmation of Elizabeth's departure. They began a systematic search: hospitals in the region, nursing homes, registry offices. Charles used his contacts in the construction sector to check if William had worked recently on any project. Margaret searched the records of the school where she had taught, trying to find colleagues who might have information about Elizabeth. It was during this search that they received an unexpected call. Frank had changed his mind and wanted to see the house. "I received the photographs you sent and also some documents. I can't deny the physical resemblance between us is impressive." Frank, who used the name David Mitchell, was a civil engineer in Charleston. He explained that curiosity had overcome skepticism, especially after seeing the photographs of the biological family. "I always wondered where my physical features came from. My adoptive parents were short and dark-haired, but I was always tall and fair. Now I see I take after my biological parents." The following Sunday, the three siblings met at the underground house for the first time in almost 60 years. It was an emotional moment, with tears, hugs, and many questions. Frank was impressed by the ingenuity of the house's construction. "Our father was truly an artist. This structure is technically perfect. Natural ventilation, proper drainage, thermal insulation. He knew what he was doing." They spent the day exploring every room, reading letters, examining photographs, trying to reconstruct the family history that had been lost. Frank brought equipment from his company to conduct a technical survey of the house. "It's much larger than it looks from the outside. It has at least 200 square meters of built area, distributed across multiple levels. It must have taken years to excavate all this." It was Frank who found something the others had missed. In the tunnel leading to the records room, there was a fork they hadn't fully explored. The right tunnel led to a smaller room which appeared to have been used recently. "Guys, someone's been living here not long ago." The room had a made bed, clean clothes in the closet, fresh groceries. It was as if Elizabeth had left just a few days ago, not months or years, as the letters suggested. Margaret felt her heart race. Was it possible Elizabeth was still alive? What if she had simply gone out to take care of some business and would return soon? They decided to wait. If Elizabeth was still alive and using that room, she would certainly return at some point. Margaret, Charles and Frank organized themselves to take turns keeping watch in the house. It was Charles who was on guard on Tuesday night when he heard footsteps in the tunnel. His heart raced as a small stooped figure appeared at the entrance to the main room, carrying a bag of groceries. "Who's there?" asked the trembling voice of an elderly woman. Charles lit the lantern and illuminated the space. Before him stood a woman of about 80, white-haired, wearing a simple dress and a shawl over her shoulders. It was unmistakably Elizabeth. "My God," she whispered, dropping the bag to the floor. "William?" "No, Elizabeth. I'm Charles, but you know me as William Jr." Elizabeth staggered, leaning against the wall. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the man before her. "William? My boy." Charles approached slowly, afraid of frightening her further. "Yes, Mother. It's me. And I found Margaret and Frank too. We're all here." Elizabeth broke down in tears, extending trembling hands to touch the face of the son she hadn't seen in almost 60 years. Charles hugged her carefully, feeling her fragile and small in his arms. "I always knew you would come, I always knew." Margaret and Frank arrived a few minutes later, alerted by Charles via phone. The reunion was indescribable. 3 children embracing the mother they had never stopped loving, even without consciously knowing who she was. Elizabeth was physically frail but mentally lucid. She explained that the farewell letters had been written as a precaution in case her health deteriorated rapidly. William had indeed passed away the previous year, but she had continued living in the house, occasionally going out to buy groceries in town. "I knew you would find this place when the time was right. I didn't know if it would be out of necessity like Margaret or out of curiosity, but I knew you would find it." Elizabeth said she had observed Margaret's financial crisis and had left subtle clues to guide her to the house. The key in the obvious place, the door not fully locked, even choosing the right moment for Margaret to discover the truth. "I saw when you were evicted. I saw Margaret's suffering when her children abandoned her, and I knew it was time for my daughter to come home." The siblings organized themselves to care for Elizabeth in her final years. Margaret and Walter moved permanently into the underground house. Charles transferred part of his business to Williamsburg to be closer. Frank began visiting regularly on weekends. Elizabeth lived 2 more years after reuniting with her children. They were the happiest years of her life, finally surrounded by the family she had always dreamed of reuniting. She had the chance to meet her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to tell family stories, to see her children prosper and love each other as siblings. Margaret discovered that her own children, Richard, Linda, and David, felt deeply ashamed when they learned the story. The discovery that their parents had found shelter and family precisely when they had abandoned them was a shock that forced them to completely reevaluate their attitudes. Richard was the first to seek out his parents in the underground house. He was impressed by the structure, by the family history he had discovered, by the dignity with which Margaret and Walter were living. "Mother, I didn't know. I never imagined you would manage so well." "We didn't just manage, Richard. We found our true family, people who love us unconditionally." Linda and David also came on separate occasions, all curious about the biological grandmother they never knew existed. Elizabeth welcomed them with the affection she had always reserved for family, but made it clear that her priority was the children she had lost and found again. The family dynamic changed completely. Margaret's children realized they were not as indispensable as they had imagined, and that their parents were capable of building a full life without depending on them. This forced them to rethink their relationship with their parents, moving from seeing them as a burden to understanding them as people with rich and complex histories. Elizabeth passed away peacefully on a winter morning, surrounded by her 3 children and Walter. Her last words were of gratitude for having managed to reunite the family before departing. "Now I can find William in peace. Our mission here was complete." Elizabeth's funeral was small but meaningful. Besides her 3 children and their families, some neighbors who knew her from her trips to town attended, as did the local priest who had always admired her for her unwavering faith and some merchants who respected her for her honesty in the small purchases she made. Margaret read a text during the ceremony. Elizabeth Turner Henderson was much more than our biological mother. She was a woman who transformed the greatest suffering of her life into an act of unconditional love, who chose to give up her own happiness to ensure the well-being of her children, who never gave up hope that one day we would be a family again. She taught us that true love is capable of waiting decades, of building bridges across time, of transforming pain into healing. Today we are not here to mourn a farewell, but to celebrate a love that overcame all adversity. After Elizabeth's passing, the underground house became the official meeting point for the reunified family. Margaret and Walter continued living there, but now received regular visits from siblings, in-laws, nieces, nephews, and their own children, who gradually grew closer to their parents again. Charles made improvements to the house's structure, installing electricity, central heating, a communication system with the outside. Frank contributed his technical knowledge to expand some rooms and create a garden on the surface of the hill. "Our mother built the foundations," said Frank during a family gathering. "Now it's up to us to build the future upon them." Margaret became the matriarch of the reunified family. With her experience as a teacher, she organized a complete archive of the family history, documenting not only the past that Elizabeth had preserved, but also the present they were building together. Walter, who initially felt like an intruder at that family gathering, was gradually accepted as an integral member of the family. Charles and Frank came to see him as a brother-in-law and friend, especially after realizing how he had cared for Margaret during the most difficult times. The discovery of the underground house and the story of Elizabeth had repercussions that went beyond the immediate family. The story spread throughout the Williamsburg community, inspiring others to search for lost relatives, to value family relationships, to understand that it is never too late to repair wounded relationships. Richard himself, Margaret's eldest son, was deeply impacted by the story of the grandmother he had never met. He began to question his own attitudes as a father, especially regarding the time he dedicated to family versus work. "Mother, if one day I get old and need help, I promise I won't abandon you like I did before." "Richard, it's not about promises for the future. It's about choices we make every day. Your grandmother Elizabeth taught us that family love isn't a feeling, it's a daily decision to put family first." Linda, the middle daughter, had an even more radical transformation. Elizabeth's story inspired her to reconcile with her own teenage children, from whom she had grown distant due to professional pressures. "I realized I was repeating the cycle of emotional abandonment, even while living in the same house as my children." David, the youngest, began visiting his parents regularly, bringing the grandchildren to see the underground house. The children were fascinated by the secret house of their great-grandmother, turning the place into a point of adventure and discovery. The house also became a symbol for the local community. Other elderly people facing family abandonment began seeking out Margaret to hear her story, to find inspiration and hope. Margaret created an informal support group that met monthly at the house. They called themselves Elizabeth's Children, in honor of the woman who had proven that family love can overcome any adversity. "Elizabeth taught us that family isn't just about blood," Margaret would often say at the meetings. "It's about choice, commitment, forgiveness, and hope. She chose to love us for 60 years without the guarantee that we would reciprocate. That is the kind of love we should seek in our own families." The group grew quickly, attracting people from neighboring towns. There were testimonies from parents who had reconciled with estranged children, from children who had better understood their parents' sacrifices, from entire families that had reunited after years of distance. Charles decided to write a book telling Elizabeth's complete story. The House of Unconditional Love became a regional bestseller, inspiring even more people to value family relationships. "Our mother just wanted to reunite our small family," Charles wrote in the book's introduction. "But she ended up creating a reconciliation movement that touched hundreds of lives. That was the transformative power of the love she carried." Frank developed an architectural project inspired by Elizabeth's house. He began building refuge houses for abandoned elderly people in several towns in the region. simple but dignified structures where people in situations similar to Margaret and Walter's could find shelter and hope. Every house I build is a tribute to what our biological parents did for us. They gave us shelter when we needed it most, even though we only discovered it decades later. Margaret herself returned to teaching, this time for illiterate adults in the community. She said that Elizabeth had taught her that it is never too late to start over, to learn new things, to discover hidden talents. At 70 years old, I discovered I have 2 wonderful brothers. At 71, I discovered I could inspire others with my story. Who knows what else I'll discover at 72? Walter, inspired by Margaret's family, decided to try to find his own distant relatives. He discovered cousins in neighboring towns, great uncles he thought were dead, a family tree much more extensive than he had imagined. Elizabeth's story taught me that family is the most valuable treasure we can have. I won't waste any more time without knowing my own family history. 5 years after the discovery of the underground house, the family organizes a large annual gathering they call the Elizabeth Festival. It's an event that brings together not only the direct descendants, but also families inspired by the story, the support group members, and the local community. During the festival, stories are told, experiences of family reconciliation are shared, and the lives of Elizabeth and William are celebrated. The underground house is opened for tours, allowing others to physically see the love built stone by stone. Margaret, now 76, is considered a respected matriarch, not only in her family, but throughout the region. Her story of overcoming adversity, of late discovery of identity, of family reconciliation inspires people of all ages. Sometimes people ask me if I don't feel anger for the lost years without knowing my biological mother, Margaret reflects during one of the support group meetings. But I've learned that true love doesn't count lost time, it counts moments lived, and the 2 years I had with Elizabeth were worth a lifetime of superficial relationship. Charles expanded his business to include a social project, building affordable housing for families in vulnerable situations. He donates part of his construction company's profits to fund decent housing, always remembering the example of William, who built a home with his own hands. My father taught me that a house isn't just a roof and 4 walls. It's a place where love can grow, where family can gather, where dreams can be protected. Frank developed new sustainable construction technologies, inspired by the rudimentary but efficient techniques William had used in the underground house. His innovations gained national recognition in the field of ecological architecture. The most sophisticated engineering I've ever studied was that of a man who didn't have a college degree, but had love for his family and determination to build a better future. The Henderson Turner family story became a local legend in Williamsburg. Tour guides include the hill where the underground house is located in their itineraries, telling the story of Elizabeth and William as an example of perseverance and unconditional love. The city's mayor's office created the Elizabeth Turner Award, given annually to people who excel in promoting family unity or caring for vulnerable seniors. Margaret was the first winner of the award, but insisted on dedicating it to her mother's memory. Elizabeth didn't just reunite our family. She taught us that love is the only force capable of building bridges over any abyss, whether of time, pain, or misunderstanding. The underground house remains the heart of the reunited family. It has been expanded several times, always respecting Elizabeth and William's original design. Today it has 15 rooms, including bedrooms for all family members when they visit, a library with the complete family history, and a workshop where Margaret gives craft lessons. Walter, at 76, became the official guardian of the house. He is the one who welcomes visitors, tells the story, and takes care of the maintenance of the place. He says it's his way of honoring Elizabeth, who gave him not just a wife, but an entire family. When I first entered this house, I thought I was trespassing on someone's property. Now I know I was coming home. Elizabeth knew I would take care of her daughter. That's why she guided us here. Margaret's grandchildren, children of Richard, Linda, and David, grew up hearing the stories of their great-grandmother, Elizabeth. They consider the underground house a second home, a magical place where the family gathers and where the roots of their identity are preserved. Grandma Margaret always says, "We are the branches of the tree that great-grandma Elizabeth planted," says 15-year-old granddaughter Sophia, "and that our responsibility is to keep growing but always remember where we came from." Elizabeth's influence extends even to generations who never knew her. Her great-grandchildren learned values of family, forgiveness, and perseverance through the stories told by Margaret. They carry the legacy without even fully understanding its magnitude. 17-year-old great-grandson Michael decided to study architecture inspired by the stories about William and about Uncle Frank. He wants to specialize in social housing, continuing the family's work of building homes for those in need. Great-grandma Elizabeth taught me that an architect doesn't just build buildings, they build possibilities for happiness for families. 12-year-old great-granddaughter Anna Claire began documenting family gatherings on video, creating a digital family archive to preserve the stories for future generations. "I want my children, when I have them, to be able to know great-grandma Elizabeth through the videos even though she's no longer here." The underground house has also become an informal research center for genealogy. Margaret corresponds with various families in the region who are searching for lost relatives. Her investigation method, inspired by the techniques Elizabeth used to follow her children's lives, has already reunited dozens of families. Elizabeth taught me that finding family is just the first step. The most important thing is to build relationships that last, that withstand difficulties, that grow over time. Richard, Margaret's eldest son, was completely transformed after learning his grandmother's story. He, who had been the most resistant to helping his parents, became the most dedicated to family well-being. Grandma Elizabeth's story showed me that parents are not eternal, and that regret is a burden no one should carry. I'd rather tire myself out taking care of my family than regret not having done so when I had the chance. Richard created a family foundation that offers financial and emotional support to abandoned elderly people. The Elizabeth Turner Foundation has already assisted over 500 people in the region, offering everything from help with medications to family mediation for reconciliations. Linda, who had always been the most pragmatic of the children, developed a home visitation program for isolated seniors. She coordinates a team of volunteers who provide companionship, help with household tasks, and identify situations of vulnerability. My mother told me how Grandma Elizabeth used to watch our house from afar, dreaming of being able to help us. Now I enter these people's homes and do what Grandma Elizabeth would have liked to do. I care, I listen, I accompany. David, the youngest, who had been the most absent during his parents' crisis, became the official organizer of family gatherings. He coordinates the monthly meetings, special events and celebrations of birthdays and important dates. I learned that family isn't automatic, it's daily work, and I want to work every day to deserve being part of this family that Grandma Elizabeth built. The transformation of Margaret's children was so significant that they themselves became speakers at events about family relationships. They share their experience of almost losing their parents through indifference and how the discovery of Elizabeth's story changed their perspectives. "Our parents had a whole rich family history that we knew nothing about," Richard often says in his lectures. "We were treating as a burden two people who were actually survivors of an incredible story of love and sacrifice." The underground house was officially designated as Municipal Historical Heritage, not for its age or traditional architectural value, but for the social meaning it represents, a symbol of family resilience, of unconditional love, of hope that conquers time. Margaret was invited to write her memoirs, but preferred to maintain a blog where she shares weekly reflections on family, aging, and the late discovery of identity. The blog, Letters to Elizabeth, has thousands of followers across the United States. "I write to my mother every week, telling her how our family is doing, how her grandchildren and great-grandchildren are growing, how the love she planted continues to bear fruit." One of her most shared reflections was about the meaning of coming home. "For 70 years I thought home was just the place where I lived. Elizabeth taught me that home is where we are loved unconditionally, where our history is preserved, where our future is built. I didn't just return to a house of stones dug into the mountain. I returned to the heart of a family that never stopped loving me." The impact of the story extended beyond the family and the city's borders. American universities began studying the case as an example of family resilience and active aging. Gerontology researchers regularly visit the house to understand how an effective environment influences the well-being of the elderly. Margaret became an informal consultant for nursing homes and assisted living facilities, helping to develop strategies to maintain family bonds even when the elderly need institutional care. It's not about where a person lives, but how connected they feel to their history and their family. Elizabeth lived in a cave, but felt like she was in a palace because she was surrounded by love and hope. Walter developed a new passion at 77, gardening. He created a garden on the surface above the underground house, planting fruit trees, medicinal herbs, and flowers that attract birds. It is his way of honoring William, who also loved working with his hands. William built our house by digging downward. I'm completing his work, building upward toward the sun. Walter's garden became another attraction on the property. Families visit not only to see the underground house, but to walk among the plants and reflect on their own family stories. Charles, at 65, decided to retire from the construction business to dedicate himself fully to the social project inspired by Elizabeth's story. He sold part of the construction company and created the Love Builder, which builds social housing for free for families in vulnerable situations. I discovered that building houses for people in need is much more rewarding than building mansions for people who already have everything. Frank retired from traditional engineering to dedicate himself to developing sustainable technologies for affordable housing. His research is funded by a grant he created himself, using resources from patents of his previous innovations. My father, William, taught me that true engineering isn't in complex calculations, but in the ability to solve real problems of real people with the resources available. With each passing year, Elizabeth's story gains new layers of meaning. The children born into the reunited family grow up hearing not only the original story, but also the stories of transformation it generated. Margaret maintains a tradition. Every March 15th, the anniversary of her birth and the discovery of the house, the family gathers for a special celebration. It's not just her birthday, but Family Reunification Day. On this day, we celebrate not only my birth, but the rebirth of our entire family. It's the day we remember that it's never too late to come home. During these celebrations, each family member shares something they've learned about family love in the past year. The younger children draw cards for Grandma Elizabeth, who lives in heaven, keeping alive the memory of someone they never met in person. The underground house, which began as a refuge for two abandoned elderly people, has transformed into a center radiating family love. Families come from other states to learn the story, to seek inspiration for their own relational challenges. Margaret receives an average of 5 visitors per week, people of all ages who have heard her story and want to meet in person, the woman who reunited with her family at 70. Some people ask me if I don't get tired of telling the same story, but I never tell the same story twice because it keeps growing, keeps transforming, keeps inspiring new people. One of the most moving visitors was an 80-year-old lady who had lost contact with her children 15 years earlier. After hearing Margaret's story, she decided to look for them. 6 months later, she returned to the underground house to give thanks. She had reconciled with her 3 children and was living with her youngest daughter. Margaret showed me that it's never too late to be a mother again. Another memorable visitor was a 50-year-old man who had cut ties with his parents after a family fight. Elizabeth's story made him reflect on lost time and the possibility that his parents might not be available forever. I realized I was waiting for my parents to apologize first, but Elizabeth's story taught me that the one who loves takes the initiative to reconcile, regardless of who was right or wrong. The influence of the story has also reached professionals who work with the elderly. Social workers, geriatric nurses, and psychologists specialized in aging seek out Margaret to better understand how to work with families in the process of reunification. Elizabeth taught me that work with the elderly cannot focus only on the individual. It must include the entire family structure, because no one ages well without love and connection. Margaret developed an informal methodology she calls the Elizabeth Protocol, a set of strategies to help families in conflict find paths to reconciliation. The protocol is being studied by universities as a possible family mediation tool. The Elizabeth Protocol is not technical or scientific. It's simply a guide based on unconditional love. The first question is always, what would love do in this situation? The underground house was equipped with a small auditorium where Margaret gives monthly lectures on aging with dignity and love. The lectures are free and open to the entire community, but the seats always fill up quickly. I teach what Elizabeth taught me, that aging is a privilege not everyone achieves, and that we should make this privilege an experience full of love, connection, and purpose. One of the most sought-after lectures is How to Talk to Adult Children Who Have Drifted Apart. Margaret teaches practical strategies based on her own experience of reconciliation with Richard, Linda, and David. It's not about humiliation or begging. It's about communication based on genuine love and a willingness to forgive and start over. Walter also developed his own lecture, How to Support Your Spouse in Family Reconciliation. He teaches other men of his generation to be a supportive presence when their wives face family conflicts. I learned that my role wasn't to solve Margaret's problems with her children. It was to be a safe harbor where she could lean while she resolved those problems. The story also generated a positive economic impact on the region. Tourism related to Elizabeth's House of Love brought visitors from other cities, boosting the local economy. Small hotels, restaurants, and souvenir shops benefited from the flow of people interested in the story. The City Hall created a family love route that includes, besides the underground house, other points in the city related to the story of Elizabeth and William. The cemetery where they are buried, the church where they married, the school where Margaret taught. Margaret insists that the tourist aspect does not distort the deep meaning of the story. She established strict rules for visitation, small groups, prior scheduling, voluntary contribution for the house's maintenance. Elizabeth's house is not a theme park. It is a sacred place where love overcame all adversities. Those who visit need to understand and respect that sacredness. The most ambitious project inspired by the story was the creation of the University of Family Love, a research and outreach center focused on the study and promotion of healthy family relationships. The university operates in partnership with recognized academic institutions. Margaret is an honorary professor at the university, teaching courses on family reconciliation in later life and reframing aging through love. Elizabeth taught me that we never stop learning about love, and if I learned so much at 70, imagine how much I can still teach and learn at 80, at 90. The university also offers courses for families, workshops for healthcare professionals, research on emotional longevity, all free, funded by donations from people inspired by Elizabeth's story. Charles and Frank are volunteer teachers, teaching respectively building loving homes and architecture of coexistence. Their courses mix technical knowledge with reflections on the family environment. A home is not technically perfect if it is not emotionally welcoming, teaches Frank. The best designed house in the world is just an empty building if there is no love within its walls. At 80 years old, Margaret remains active and influential. Her energy comes from the certainty that she is fulfilling a mission left by Elizabeth to spread family love as a transformative force in society. Every family that reconciles because of our story is a victory for Elizabeth. She only wanted to reunite our 3 children, but she ended up reuniting hundreds of families. Each year, Margaret receives invitations to speak in other states, to participate in television programs, to write books. She accepts selectively, always prioritizing opportunities that can inspire more family reconciliations. I don't speak to become famous. I speak because I have the responsibility to share what Elizabeth taught me. Her love was too great to be kept only within our family. Walter, at 80 years old, keeps the underground house in perfect condition. He says it is his way of honoring William, showing that the work he began continues to be cared for and valued. William built this house to last generations. It is my responsibility to ensure it truly lasts, so that Elizabeth's great-great-grandchildren can know the story. The house was equipped with solar panels and a rainwater harvesting system, modernizations that respect William's original sustainable spirit. It is completely energy self-sufficient, an example of ecological construction decades before this concept became popular. The library in the house now contains over 3,000 letters from people who visited the place and wanted to share their own stories of family reconciliation. Margaret reads them all, personally responding to those asking for guidance. Each letter is a seed of Elizabeth's love sprouting in a different family. It's moving to see how one story can multiply love around the world. One of the most moving letters came from a Japanese family who accessed the story through social media. The son had moved to the United States and lost contact with his parents in Japan. Elizabeth's story inspired him to seek them out, resulting in an intercontinental reconciliation. Love has no geographical or cultural borders. Elizabeth taught that without ever leaving her small American town. Margaret maintains regular correspondence with over 200 families who reconciled after learning her story. It's like an international mutual support network where families share experiences and encourage each other. Elizabeth created more than a reunified family. She created a global movement valuing family love. Margaret's grandchildren, now young adults, carry Elizabeth's legacy in their professional and personal choices. Sophia became a social worker specializing in family mediation. Michael graduated in architecture and works exclusively on social housing. Anna Claire studies journalism, focusing on human stories that inspire social change. We grew up knowing our lives have a greater purpose. We are a continuation of our great-grandmother Elizabeth's mission to spread love around the world. Elizabeth's great-grandchildren, the fourth generation benefited by her story, grow up in a family environment where reconciliation and forgiveness are core values. They learn from a young age that conflicts are part of relationships, but that true love always finds a way to overcome them. My great-grandchildren will never meet Elizabeth personally, reflects Margaret, but they know perfectly the kind of love she represented. That is the greatest legacy she could leave. The underground house has become an internationally studied model of how to transform personal pain into social benefit. Delegations from other countries visit the site to understand how one individual family story generated such significant collective impact. Margaret was invited by the World Cultural Organization to participate in a conference on Intangible Heritage of Humanity, Stories that Transform Societies. She represented the United States, speaking about how family traditions can be tools for social change. Elizabeth never imagined her house hidden in the mountain would be visited by people from all over the world, but true love always reaches further than we can imagine. The conference resulted in a global project mapping love stories that changed communities. Elizabeth's story was chosen as the main case study, inspiring similar initiatives in other countries. At 81 years old, Margaret continues to discover new aspects of Elizabeth's personality through objects and documents that still surface in the house. She recently found a secret diary where Elizabeth recorded her dreams during the years of separation from her children. Even while sleeping, she dreamed of us. She dreamed of our reunion, of our embraces, of our family life. Her dreams became our reality. Elizabeth's dreams, recorded in the diary, reveal surprising details about her emotional connection with her children, even while separated from them. She dreamed of specific situations that actually happened in the lives of Margaret, Charles, and Frank, as if there existed an inexplicable link between them. Science may not explain it, but love explains everything. Elizabeth was connected to us in a way that goes beyond rational understanding. Elizabeth's dream diary has become a subject of study for researchers interested in the emotional connection between separated parents and children. Universities requested access to the material for research on family bonds and maternal intuition. Margaret granted copies for research, but keeps the originals at the house, considering them too sacred to leave. These are the nightly conversations Elizabeth had with us for 60 years. They cannot be treated as mere academic documents. The discovery of the diary generated even more visits to the house. Mothers who gave up children for adoption seek out Margaret to share similar experiences. Adopted children come seeking hope that their biological mothers also think of them with love. Elizabeth gave a voice to millions of silent mothers who love distant children. Her diary represents all the mothers who cry softly so as not to be heard. The tradition of the Elizabeth Festival grew and now takes place over an entire week in March, culminating on the 15th, Margaret's birthday. There are 7 days of activities, lectures, workshops, family gatherings, celebrations, and a large fellowship on Sunday. The festival is not just about Elizabeth. It's about all the Elizabeths that exist in the world, all the mothers and fathers who love unconditionally, all the families who are reunited. During the festival, the underground house receives special decorations made by Elizabeth's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Flowers, pennants, posters with inspiring phrases written by Elizabeth herself in her letters. We transform the house into a party because Elizabeth deserved parties. She spent her life building joy for others. Now it's time to celebrate the joy she gave us. The festival attracts participants from various countries. Entire families travel to Williamsburg specifically to take part in the celebrations, many reporting they were inspired by the story to resolve their own family conflicts. Margaret, your family doesn't belong only to the United States. It belongs to the world. Elizabeth has become the grandmother of humanity, said a German visitor during the 2023 festival. The phrase grandmother of humanity spread, and Elizabeth began to be referenced this way by people who know her story, even without a direct family connection to her. Margaret organized a project called Letters to the Grandmother of Humanity, where people from all over the world send letters to Elizabeth, telling their own stories of family reconciliation inspired by her. I receive letters in languages I don't understand, but I perfectly understand the love they carry. Elizabeth continues to reunite families, even though she is no longer physically here. The letters are translated by volunteers and organized into volumes that make up a special collection in the house's library. There are already over 15,000 letters from 60 different countries. It's as if Elizabeth had a posthumous correspondence with the whole world, and all the letters speak of love, forgiveness, and family. Margaret, Walter, Charles, and Frank, all now octogenarians, remain active and united, proving that old age can be a phase of fulfillment when lived in a loving family. Elizabeth taught us to age with purpose. Every day we live is an opportunity to honor the love she gave us and multiply that love for other people. The underground house was equipped with accessibility ramps and other features, so the elderly family members can continue to visit the place safely and comfortably. Our house needs to age along with us, always keeping its doors open to all generations of the family. Walter developed arthritis in his hands, but continues to care for the garden with the help of Elizabeth's great-grandchildren. He teaches the children how to plant, how to care for the plants, how to observe nature's cycle. I teach them that a garden is like a family. It needs daily care, patience to grow, and love to flourish. The plants from Walter's garden are used in teas and home remedies he prepares for the whole family. It's her way of caring for everyone's health, maintaining Elizabeth's tradition of always having something special prepared for when the family gathers. Margaret developed diabetes, but she perfectly controls the condition by maintaining proper nutrition and regular exercise. She walks daily through Walter's garden, reflecting on life and mentally preparing the words she will share with the visitors who arrive regularly. I take care of my health because I have responsibilities. Many people depend on Elizabeth's story to find hope in their own lives. Charles had a mild heart attack at 78 but recovered completely. He says the scare made him value every family moment even more. I thought I was going to meet Elizabeth and William without having finished the work they started. Now I take better care of myself so I can work more years for the family. Frank developed cataracts, but after surgery regained perfect vision. He jokes that he can now see better than in his youth. Elizabeth gave me new eyes at 80. Now I see things that previously went unnoticed, details of the love between people, small gestures that make a difference. The health of the 4 elders is monitored by a medical team that formed naturally among professionals inspired by the family's story. Doctors, nurses, and physical therapists offer voluntary care, considering it a privilege to care for people who contribute so much to the community. Caring for Elizabeth's family is our way of repaying all the good they do for our town and for so many other families, explains Dr. Robert, a volunteer geriatrician. The underground house was officially declared an effective heritage of humanity by the Municipal Council of Culture, a special category created exclusively to recognize its emotional and social value. It is not a historical heritage in the traditional sense. It is a heritage of the human heart, a place where love built its masterpiece, declared the mayor at the landmark designation ceremony. Margaret was honored with the title of Meritorious Citizen of Williamsburg. During the ceremony, she dedicated the honor to Elizabeth's memory. "I am merely Elizabeth's messenger. Every honor I receive belongs to her, who had the courage to love when to love was synonymous with suffering." The honor was accompanied by the creation of an Elizabeth Turner Scholarship for young people interested in working with the elderly or in family mediation. Margaret participated in the selection of the first scholars. Elizabeth always believed in education as a tool for transformation. This scholarship allows young people to study, to help other families as Elizabeth helped ours. The first scholars in the program developed innovative projects to support the elderly, including an app that connects isolated seniors with families willing to adopt them affectionately. Technology in the service of love. Elizabeth would approve. She always used every available resource to care for the family. Margaret regularly participates in selection panels for new scholars, always prioritizing candidates who demonstrate a genuine understanding of the importance of intergenerational family bonds. "I'm not just looking for technical competence. I seek hearts that understand that working with the elderly is working with people full of history, wisdom, and love to give." The influence of the story has crossed academic and social boundaries, inspiring artists from different fields. A theatre company created the play The House of Time, based on Elizabeth's story. A composer wrote the cantata Letters of Eternal Love. A filmmaker produced the documentary Elizabeth, the Mother Who Built Love. Art is the universal language of love. When artists tell Elizabeth's story, they translate it for people who might not be reached by words alone. Margaret watched the premiere of every artistic work inspired by Elizabeth, always moved to see how different languages can capture the essence of the story. Each work is a different way for Elizabeth to keep speaking to the world. She speaks through theatre, music, film, through every art that touches human hearts. The royalties from the artistic works are donated to the Elizabeth Turner Foundation, expanding the resources available for projects supporting families and the elderly. Elizabeth continues to provide for the family, even decades after her passing. Now she provides for a family that includes thousands of people around the world. The foundation has expanded its activities to include free family mediation, psychological support for abandoned seniors, literacy programs for the elderly, and projects for dignified housing for people in vulnerable situations. Every foundation project responds to a need that Elizabeth identified during her life. She observed not only our family, but the entire community around us. Margaret remains the foundation's main advisor, guiding choices based on what she believes Elizabeth would do in each situation. I always ask myself, what would Elizabeth do? And the answer always involves more love, more understanding, more willingness to help. The question, what would Elizabeth do, has become a well-known saying in the region. Families use it to make difficult decisions. Professionals use it to guide their services. Young people use it to choose careers. Elizabeth has become a moral compass for our community. When people don't know which direction to take, they think about what unconditional love would do. Margaret developed a series of educational booklets based on Elizabeth's principles: How to Build Family Bridges, The Forgiveness That Heals Generations, Aging with Love and Dignity, How to Talk to Those We've Hurt. Elizabeth spoke through letters and actions. Now she speaks through booklets that can reach places we could never go personally. The booklets are distributed free of charge in schools, health centers, churches, and community centers. They have already been translated into 12 languages and distributed in 20 countries. It's amazing how simple principles based on love can be universal. What works for our American family works for families all over the world. One of the most sought-after booklets is How to Prepare Children to Care for Aging Parents. Margaret writes, based on her experience of seeing selfish children transform into dedicated caregivers. Elizabeth taught me that we should never give up on our children, no matter how distant they are. Love has the power to transform any heart. The booklet includes practical strategies for communication between generations, tips for creating meaningful family memories, suggestions for family rituals that strengthen bonds. Family isn't automatic. It's built day by day, through small gestures, honest conversations, time dedicated to each other. Margaret regularly receives letters from parents and children who have managed to improve their relationships by following the booklet's guidance. Each letter is confirmation that Elizabeth's work continues to bear fruit. Elizabeth planted a seed of love in 1958 when I was born. 60 years later, that seed has become a forest that shelters thousands of families. At 82 years old, Margaret maintains the tradition of writing weekly on the blog, Letters to Elizabeth. Her most recent reflections address the legacy she wants to leave for future generations. Elizabeth taught me that our responsibility is not just to live well, but to leave the world better for those who come after. I hope I am fulfilling this responsibility. One of her most shared reflections was on the meaning of aging surrounded by love. To age is not to lose capabilities. It is to transform experience into wisdom, pain into understanding, years into history to share. Elizabeth aged by building love. I am aging by spreading the love she built. Margaret began preparing a new generation to continue the work of preserving and sharing Elizabeth's history. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren receive specific training in family mediation, empathetic communication, and community leadership. I do not want Elizabeth's story to die with me. I want it to be continued by people who have truly understood the transformative power of family love. Sophia, the social worker granddaughter, is being prepared to take over the coordination of the Foundation's social projects. Michael, the architect grandson, will be responsible for the physical maintenance of the house and the expansion of the housing projects. Anna Claire, the journalist granddaughter, will handle communication and historical records. Each grandchild has specific talents that can serve Elizabeth's legacy. I am just helping them discover how to use those talents to continue her work. The generational transition is happening gradually, allowing Margaret to maintain supervision while the new generation takes on increasing responsibilities. Elizabeth taught me that to delegate is not to give up. It is to trust that the love we planted will continue to grow through other people. Walter, at 82, continues to be the official guardian of the underground house. He developed a training program for young guardians, teaching not only the physical maintenance of the place, but its historical and emotional importance. This house is sacred. Whoever cares for it must understand they are not just caring for stones and wood, but for a symbol of love that inspires people all over the world. Charles and Frank, both 80 years old, remain active in their social projects, but have begun training successors among their own children and grandchildren. Our mission is bigger than our individual lives. We must ensure it continues even when we are no longer here. The underground house recently received its last major expansion, a digital library where Elizabeth's entire history is digitized and available to researchers worldwide. Elizabeth always preserved our family history in letters and physical objects. Now we preserve her history in a way that can never be lost. The digital library includes not only Elizabeth's original documents, but also all the letters received from people inspired by the story, records of the social projects developed, and testimonies from reconciled families. It is a living archive of the transformative power of love. Future researchers will be able to study how an individual story generated social change on a global scale. Margaret personally oversees the digitization, ensuring each document is treated with the respect due to its emotional importance. Every paper Elizabeth touched carries love. Even while digitizing, we treat each document as a sacred relic. The digital library has already received inquiries from researchers in 15 countries, studying topics such as family resilience, active aging, conflict mediation, and vernacular architecture. Elizabeth is being studied at universities she never imagined existed. Her simple love has become the subject of international academic research. One of the most interesting studies is being conducted by Japanese sociologists who want to understand how United States family traditions can be adapted to strengthen family bonds in Japanese culture. It is fascinating to see how love knows no cultural boundaries. What worked for Elizabeth can inspire families in completely different cultures. Margaret regularly participates in video conferences with international researchers, sharing insights about Elizabeth's personality and the factors that made her story so impactful. I speak with people who have never been to the United States, but who know Elizabeth better than many of her neighbors. Her love transcended all barriers. The most ambitious project in development is the creation of Elizabeth houses in other countries, family support centers inspired by the original underground house. There are already confirmed initiatives in Canada, Ireland, and Japan. Elizabeth never left Williamsburg, but her love is traveling the world and taking root in places she never even imagined existed. Margaret has been invited to personally inaugurate the first international Elizabeth House, which will be built in Philadelphia. At 82 years old, it will be her first international trip. I never thought I would travel to another country at 82 to talk about my mother, but Elizabeth's love knows no borders, so I cannot know them either. The Philadelphia Elizabeth House will be a family mediation and senior support center, built following William's architectural principles and Elizabeth's emotional principles. Every Elizabeth house built in the world will be a little piece of our underground house. Elizabeth continues to build homes where love can grow. Margaret has begun writing her final memoirs, a book she calls Elizabeth's Last Embrace. Her reflections on 15 years living the legacy of the mother she found at 70. I want to record not only what Elizabeth did, but what she continues to do through the people touched by her story. The book will include selected letters from people around the world inspired by the story, photographs of the evolution of the underground house, accounts of family reconciliations, and reflections on the universal meaning of maternal love. It will be my final letter to Elizabeth, telling her how her small story of family love transformed into a global movement of reconciliation. Margaret works on the book every morning, sitting at the table where Elizabeth wrote her letters for decades. She says she feels her mother's presence guiding every word. I write at her table with her pen. Looking out the window, she looked out. It's as if she is dictating what I should write. The book is awaited by publishers from various countries who want to publish it simultaneously in multiple languages. Margaret insists that all royalties be donated to the Elizabeth Turner Foundation. Elizabeth never charged for the love she gave. I cannot charge for the love story she left me. At 83 years old, Margaret maintains her usual energy, inspired by the responsibility of honoring Elizabeth's legacy while she still has the strength to do so. Every day I live is a gift Elizabeth gave me. I use each day to multiply the love she taught me. Her daily routine remains centered on the underground house, mornings writing, afternoons receiving visitors, evenings with family. It is a simple life, but profoundly meaningful. Elizabeth taught me that happiness is not in great achievements, but in small moments of shared love. I live each day as she taught me. The underground house continues to be the heart of the reunified family, and the center from which Elizabeth's love radiates to the world. It is a place where past and future meet, where tears turn into smiles, where hope never dies. This house that Elizabeth built stone by stone has become the most important place in my life. Here I discovered who I am, where I come from, and what my purpose in the world is. Margaret knows her days on earth are numbered, but she shows no sadness or fear. On the contrary, she feels fulfilled by the certainty that she has managed to honor Elizabeth's love and perpetuate her message. When my time to depart arrives, I will find Elizabeth proud of what we have done with the love she planted. I will tell her about every family that reconciled, every elderly person who found dignity, every heart that learned to love better. End of story. Now we want to know your opinion on this moving story. Do you believe a mother's love can truly overcome decades of separation? Have you ever experienced a family reconciliation? Share your opinion with us in the comments and tell us where you are following us from. Your participation is very important to our community. Leave your like if the story touched your heart. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one. Thank you very much for your company.